Hello, and thank you for joining us. If you're a business leader, you're probably looking to AI to drive efficiency and innovation. If you're a business leader, you're also likely to have sustainability commitments, and those objectives are not always compatible. AI can help to track energy emissions and streamline operational processes, but it also consumes a huge amount of energy. Here's a couple of statistics for you on that. The rise of AI means data centers in Ireland could be using 35% of the country's energy by next year. And you may already have heard that ChatGPT uses 10 times more electricity than a Google search. So is AI the problem or the solution to sustainable growth? Welcome to this webinar on AI's Energy Challenge, where we'll address this very conundrum. I'm Katharine Rooney, Editorial Director at Phronesis Partners, and I'm delighted to be joined by a set of panelists who are ideally placed to share their insights on this. Francis Hintermann is Global Managing Director of Accenture Research, which looks at game-changing business, market, and technology trends through provocative thought leadership. Francis is currently focused on the business and societal impacts of AI and generative AI, and the way companies develop successful AI strategies to create value. Graeme Cooper is AECOM's Vice President of Energy Advisory for North America. A Fellow of the Energy Institute, he has over 2 decades of experience in the power, energy market and utility sectors, and has advised the UK and Irish governments and the EU on policy, regulatory, climate and market issues. And Pina Schlombs is Sustainability Lead at Siemens Digital Industry Software, where she brings expertise from Siemens and Volkswagen to help organizations implement sustainability ambitions with digital technologies. With a master's degree in sustainable engineering, she advocates data-driven approaches that embrace AI to achieve net zero goals at speed and scale. Welcome all of you. Thank you for being with us today. And Francis, I'm going to start with you here because Accenture has predicted this will be the year of scaled AI, when we're likely to see exponential growth of the technology. I wonder if you can talk about how we've reached this tipping point and what that means for business, both in terms of enhanced capability and, of course, for energy demand.
Good third of the companies have scaled AI, not all of them, but we can see the intent to scale AI across the enterprise is a lot larger than this third I was mentioning. So we can see this this surge, and what is interesting here for the future is that the initial cases that we were seeing was much more transversal, as we say, on marketing, on sales, on the IT function itself, of course. And we can see now a pivot towards what we call vertical cases, which mean really cases which are addressing the core business of a different industry. Think about banking, think about insurance, consumer goods, life sciences, and so on and so forth. So we can see that momentum, and that momentum, of course, has a consequence in terms of the technology spend of company and in terms of the spend they have for AI in particular. Now, when it comes to AI in particular, what may foresee that because the cost of investment, the cost efficiency of AI investment may decrease, that may result in saving for companies. What we have shown, what we have seen in the past, and you may remember what the British economist Jevons saw in the 19th century with coal, is that when the production of coal became more efficient, the consumption of people of coal did not decrease. In fact, it increased. And that's what we can see as well with AI today, is that we can anticipate that it's not because AI is going to become more efficient in terms of cost for companies that the use is going to stagnate or decrease. On the contrary, what we expect is that the usage of AI is going to continue to grow exponentially, and that may result, if nothing is done, in the type of data that you are mentioning, where the actual cost in terms of the impact of carbon emissions directly coming from AI can grow 10 times in the next 6 years. So it's going to be pretty significant.
And what are your clients saying to you about that, Francis? Is there kind of concern and questions around finding that balance?
Yeah, that's a challenge. Let's be clear on that. That's absolutely a challenge, and that's why more and more companies are interested to put some governance around the way that they invest in AI that includes some dimension on sustainability. Now, the challenges are there. Some of them can be solved through better governance of it. Some of them will depend on the type of solution that will be put in place by the companies which are developing the AI systems themselves.
Okay, thank you. And of course, it's not just the clients that Francis is speaking to and those of us in the room here today who are thinking about those challenges. Today, President Trump has signed an executive order to revive the US coal industry, in part to help power AI. So, Graeme, I'm wondering what the trade-off is between the environment and commercial reality in the energy transition. Is clean energy like nuclear and geothermal, for instance, the answer, or will we still need to lean into gas and coal?
So firstly, Katharine, thank you. Just to level set here, before we even talk about the growth in energy demand for AI, okay, we're already on an energy transition. So most G7 economies will double the amount of electricity they use between now and 2050. To be able to do that, we're going to need between 4 and 6 times the amount of clean energy generation than we've had historically, right? And we're going to need twice the grid capacity. So one of the things we need to have in context is the growth in demand for AI is being layered on top of electrification of transport, electrification of heat, and that move around energy, the efficiency of electrifying many things. The other thing we need to look at here is when we look at the comment that Francis made in that growth in utility grade energy takes time. There's equipment in New York, transformers in New York City, Manhattan, and the transformers are 100 years old, right? And they were reliable, they still work. So the challenge you've got a fast moving sector that is growing exponentially at an interface with a sector that grows slowly, cautiously, and responds to a mature market. So at the moment, that's just a level set. When we look at the growth in demand for data centers and obviously hyperscaling AI data centers, the traditional model was you develop the data center where you want the data center, you make a grid application, an interconnect or a grid transmission distribution application, and by the time you've built the data center 18, 20 months later, the grid has turned up. That world arguably has now gone, but there are grid queues in many jurisdictions. So coming back to your question, which is, how are we going to sort of serve this? And is it clean, dirty? The answer is it's going to be all of the above. I had a really good conversation this week. Somebody said, once you've seen one data center, you've seen them all. I think arguably what we're looking at now is you've seen one data center, you've seen one data center. Each one in each geography is going to have to be considered on its own. It's going to have to be considered in the energy environment that it sits. What is the opportunity for grid sourced power? Can it mitigate some of that by generating its own? In which case, what is the technology to generate your own? But also, how does it consider those wider benefits? I mean, let's give a real sensible one here, right? So at the moment, grid queues in many countries, you've got a queue for people to generate power. So you've got wind and solar and batteries in that queue. And then on the demand side, you've got a queue for demand. So you've got data centers and growth in offices and housing. Hang on, if they collaborate, you take both of those out of the queue. So I think, trying to sort of sum up is you're going to have to look at every data center by data center. You're going to have to look at working with the whole system impact. How does the data center become actually part of the solution, not the problem? And you're going to have to consider all technologies and the consequence of those technologies. I mean, I'll give you an example. If we're going to use the news from Mr. Trump this week, if you're going to build a coal-fired power station so that it can actually sort of serve its life and recoup its upfront cost, it's going to have to run for 40 years. Well, the term of a president's office, as we know, is 4 years. What is the consequence of locking something in that's going to burn dirty fuel for 40? I think there's an element here is don't necessarily let the news out of the White House get in the way of a good, there's facts and good stories, right? I think there's an element here which is industry needs consistency, it needs certainty, and if it's going to invest, either in a grid connection or its own generation or partnering for its power supply, it's going to need some long-term stability. And at the moment, the politics is not long-term or stable.
I know you spoke as well in previous conversation, Graeme, about tech companies needing to change their business models, not kind of looking to outsource their energy supply, but there are several that are now planning to invest in their own energy sources. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about how companies like the big tech, for instance, need to change their business models to ensure that they've got sufficient energy production.
Well, absolutely. I mean, so firstly, anybody who demands energy, whether we're consumers at home or in the office, we expect energy to turn up when we switch on the light. So resiliency and reliability is really important. If you are a data center, you need that resilience. You need time to market, right? Time to power. And you need to know that the power is certainty because you've backed off your agreements with your clients for that reliability. So what we've seen, and I've seen in the US already, I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, but we've already seen in the US, one of the top 3 large hyperscalers has already committed to build a gas-fired power station to power 1 or 2 data centers in a cluster. They've never had to invest that huge capex up front for a gas-fired power station before. It completely distorts their business model. But what it does do is they've seen that as a means to an end. They can't deliver for their client unless they own generation. But that then leads you into other opportunities. They're never going to want that power station sat on their balance sheet. So at the point at which they've de-risked it, it's been built and contracted and been built, there are more innovative ways that they could sell off a 49% share, to a pension fund, because a pension fund's just interested in a revenue stream. They could actually sell down and lease back through the energy. So there are ways. I mean, it's challenging the ways the business model works for data centers. Are they just going to outsource power? Are they going to work with a third party and underwrite a risk? Are they going to take the generation risk themselves? Or do they take the risk and then dilute that risk out? I mean, the one thing I'd say is there is, as I said, you've seen one data center, you've seen one data center. I think you need to look at each one in isolation, the business model of the business, their risk appetite, the technology solution. I mean, what I would say is it drives the need, and I would say this working for a professional services business, work with experts in the field to unpack all the layers of the onion, that whole system thinking from business models to delivery, from investment to operation is going to be really critical for great successful outcomes.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to you now, Pina, because obviously you work for a technology company, but very much in the sustainability space. We've spoken about or referenced Gen AI with regard to ChatGPT, for instance, but Siemens is doing a lot of work in industrial AI, and I'm wondering if you can explain a bit more about what that is and talk about the role that it's playing in the green transition.
Yes, of course. I'm thinking so much resonated already with what Francis and you, Graeme, you've been talking about. So picking that up in a minute. But let's first, define the what we mean under this terminology of industrial AI. And we felt it's very important to differentiate from basically consumer AI, because in the industrial space, what we really need AI models to do is and to be is trustworthy, right? We need to be able to trust the results or the suggestions that a model will give us. We need it to be reliable and we need it to be accurate to be really useful in the industrial space. So this is basically what we mean when we're talking about industrial AI as core characteristics. And on top of that, what we also need AI to be able to do is to have this domain expertise of what the industrial manufacturing product engineering world is, right? And it's very much governed by the laws of nature, right? It's That's for us very intuitive, and every design engineer, every manufacturing engineer, supply chain expert knows that, but that's what we need the AI to know as well. So basically what we need to do is for the AI models we employ in the industrial world to have that scientific reasoning that we are very much used to in the human scale, right? So to have this laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, of biology, for the models to know them so that they can take them into consideration and guide us and support, augment the experts that we have in the field working in our industries to support and augment the solutions that we're finding and building. And now coming to the what does it all mean for sustainability? I want to basically divide it into two main aspects. And the first one would be basically around the what we've been talking about so far is the sustainability of AI. Right. So basically, what is the impact, the footprint that all the training, all the inference, the entire tech stack of AI incurs. And of course, there are so many aspects that have environmental impacts in there. And I feel it's very important here to differentiate between the tech stack itself, right? There's many different layers from the hardware of the chips, the infrastructure, how chips are um, in constellation together, the architecture of also the software that runs the chips, that orchestrates um, where which chips are accessed and when, and then the application layer. Basically, that would be the one that was most familiar to the most people, right? Where we know how we access and interact with a Copilot, a ChatGPT, right? And this would be, but this is for me important to differentiate that this is only one part, and each layer of this tech stack is very much evolving and being optimized the help of AI actually. And this is where I feel also what Graeme, you were talking about earlier. It's so important to see this as a system of systems, right? That not only the tech stack interacts and determines that the environmental impact that the AI that we not only train but then run has. And we are actually using AI to also optimize even that tech stack within itself. So there's software that designs the chips that is augmented with AI, that is optimizing how the chips are designed so that they are more efficient, right? So it's a self-feeding cycle here, actually, optimizing the tech stack, the technology part of AI. And I want to pick up as well, Graeme, you were sharing like we need to think about, okay, how are even just data centers, right? What is their interaction with their environment? You were talking about the business model, and when I talk with our um, partners that are running data centers and also our own data centers that we are running, we're seeing it really as this kind of system that sits within a infrastructure, right? It needs to connect to the grid, both from electricity wise, but also data wise. And then also what we were talking about earlier, there's a lot of heat So heat and cooling that's involved in that equation. And what I love here is that there's so many synergies that can be found. I love this example. We are working together with a company that's basically doing like controlled environment agriculture that needs this constant supply of warmth, heat, basically. Now then, once you put that next to a data center, you can leverage that downstream heat, right, from the data center, basically to feed it to the agriculture cultures that are growing salads or whatnot, right? So I think it's finding these synergies. We need to look beyond the systems as we've been looking at it just within the walls of our own companies, but look beyond. Okay, where can the basically the waste stream of one value stream be the input stream for another, right? The waste heat being the input for, in this case, controlled environment agriculture. So lots of different examples to tap into here as the sustainability of AI. And I want to turn now onto the, okay, how can we use, especially industrial AI for sustainability? Now, there is so much that I can tap into, but I just want to give like three main examples here. So mainly what I do when I look into, when working with our entities that build hardware, right? They build train, they build medical technology, production equipment. What we're looking into and what is my focus is how can we leverage software that is focused on product engineering, that is focused on manufacturing, designing plants and running them, and also for supply chains. How can we use AI here to optimize all of these processes for sustainability? And I'll start with one example that I really love from the product design space, on where applying AI to the product design world actually has so many high upsides in terms of the environmental impact that we can leverage here. And this is a case where we designed or redesigned actually gripper of an industrial robot. So you all know these big robots that have these massive grippers at the end in industrial manufacturing sites that basically take stuff from left to right in a production line. Now these can be massive. And in the example where we optimized just the gripper, I mean, we were able to reduce the weight of this gripper by 80%. And because the gripper is lighter, the robot can be smaller, right? That means that the energy consumption of that robot is significantly less. And also the space that the robot needs is less. So optimization on so many fronts, just with looking at, okay, what is the key part in systems that I can lever how to optimize the whole system in itself. So 80% reduction in weight. With that, we achieved over 90% reduction in energy consumption over the lifetime of this robot. And you can imagine like how many of these robots are run in factories worldwide. So it's scaling significantly. And as well, the cost came down also above 80%. So I think this is such a powerful example of if we apply AI intelligently, all that training, right, is actually leading to so much usefulness, right? So, and I feel that this is often left out of the equation, the benefits actually for sustainability if we apply AI in an intelligent way. And I could go on even in manufacturing. We have examples where we can extend the lifetime of production machines because we have basically we can feel the pulse of every machine. We all know these wearables that we're all wearing. Basically, we have the same in an industrial setting, and we can inference from these all this data that we're getting back. So how can we keep these machines alive? Basically, optimizing the longevity of these machines, cutting down downtime, improving the quality as well of the products that are being produced on these lines. And the last example that I want to share is in supply chains. I know we have all been experiencing like the whole turbulence, the dynamics of supply chains, of global supply chains, not only during COVID, but even now when I speak to sustainability leaders and our supply chain experts, it's okay, well, we want to optimize everywhere, right? But even just, okay, can we use this bio-based plastic? Can we even source it in the volumes that we need and the quality that we need over the foreseeable timescale that we have our planning for, right? All of that is something that we can build powerful AI models to predict, right? Is this actually a feasible way to go, right? It's very easy to play around in a design setting where we can tweak digital twins to go more in this direction or increase the performance and sustainability. But it also helps us validate and basically have a data-driven basis to decide, also predicting how the future is going to plan out and what the not only the demand but also supply and the relation of both is going to be when we're looking for more sustainable solutions in our supply chain.
Mhm. I know,
I'd love to
Graeme,
dive.
you've been
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
at optimization
yeah.
as well. Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so this is one of those things. So we've talked about the challenge of greater energy demand, right? But we know energy demand isn't flat, right? It spikes up and down in the day, and we know that when it's windy, it's greener. If sunny, it's greener, and when you have no wind and you have no sun and high demand, it's dirtier, right? So one of the things that we're really starting to see is the energy system before the generation had to turn up and turn down to meet demand. We're now in a situation where actually demand can turn up and down to largely meet generation. So you're actually democratizing energy. And in the digital space, AI, I mean, obviously it started early with, the ability just to follow signals, but we can get really smart. So the energy system, this is why I think the energy system is actually a solution to the problem as much as AI data centers bring a problem, because we were talking about heat. If you super chilled the data center an hour ahead of a peak in demand and then turned off the air conditioning for the peak hour, the system's not going to go down, but you could actually end up taking a huge bite out of the energy demand and therefore the dirtiness of the energy you're consuming. So I think here, as much as Pina sort of articulated that AI can help physical things and digital twins, it's also going to be to some extent part of the savior of the energy system and how it copes with that huge, as I said at the outset, that doubling of demand, 4 to 6 times the amount of clean generation, twice the grid capacity. Those numbers are actually predicated on really smart upstream forecasting, really smart sweating of the grid asset optimization, and really smart demand side management. So this is why, when people sort of rail against the, AI is going to be dirty and AI is going to cause this huge energy problem, arguably it's going to bring as many solutions as the problems that it brings. And Pina, it's delightful that you're doing, we see the optimization driving in a number of areas. There's a lot of distance to go in this space.
Oh, absolutely. And I think maybe sorry, Katharine, if I could
No,
share
please
that
go.
we're working together with green energy data centers, which sit in Estonia and Tallinn, quite near to Tallinn, and they've been doing very much what you've been describing. So basically, like having a full-fledged digital twin of the whole data centers, and then connecting it to the heartbeat of like the demand and supply, right? And by taking that into the equation of and simulating, okay, what would the effect be, and then how can we optimize the heating and cooling cycles to meet those demands is exactly what they've been doing. And with the software and the models in the software that they've been using, they were able to reduce or improve the energy efficiency of that data center by 30%. Right. So I think
Yep.
that for me is like, it's not like single digit percentages, right? It's 30%. So almost a third of
Yep.
the entire energy consumption of that data center could be optimized by simply leveraging this interplay and playing in the digital world to take everything into consideration and then tweaking it exactly to how the real demand and supply is paying out.
I'd like to get into the way that we're talking about AI and energy needs and AI and sustainability. Francis, you obviously are very focused on the business and societal impacts of AI. but part of that is communicating some of these messages and themes that we've been discussing so far today. What kind of a role does thought leadership have to play in that? And perhaps you could refer to some of the recent Accenture insights on this as well.
Yeah, thank you, Katharine. Actually, I think that what Pina and Graeme just shared is the example of how useful thought leadership can be, because they both mentioned case studies in their respective fields, which, in my view, is one of the best way to articulate how something which is done in one area of a system of the economy can be useful to other companies and be useful to other part of the system. So for me, that's thought leadership in action. There are lots of discussion, as always, and it's good about the usefulness of thought leadership. Of course, my point is that it should drive action. That's really, at the end of the day, the litmus test of whether it's useful or not is driving action. It's to convince leaders through ideas that there is something to be done in their organization that can increase the performance of their organization. And through the case studies that Pina and Graeme mentioned, I think it's exactly what we can see being done in this area. And it's especially important in these turbulent times that we're facing, when there are some new technologies, and we all know that AI is complex in itself, right? It's not easy to unpack every component of a technology stack, and large language models and actually small language models, and how small language models are part of a solution, which we claim it is. But these things are important to unpack, to understand for companies, organization to actually act. And for me, that's a use of it. And I hope that's the way that thought leadership can be used by organizations around the world right now on this specific topic that we speak about, because it's super important to translate what is happening in one industry, in one part of a tech stack, in one country, to the other part of the system itself.
And Pina, you were involved in the production of a Siemens report on industrial AI and sustainability. What was important to communicate in that, and what kind of reaction have you had from the clients that you work with?
Yes, so I think that the main highlights that we got from the results of the study. So basically, what we did is together with the MIT, um, surveyed business leaders in diverse industries on how they see AI being leveraged in their field for sustainable outcomes. And the picture overall was very much everyone sees this potential of that AI is a very powerful general purpose technology has for sustainability, but also see that it very much depends on where a company sits in their digital maturity of how much a company can tap into that potential. So I mean, we've all heard these stories of, well, we are started with our AI pilots, and then there were a lot of them that did not give us the results that we were hoping for, because we also learned, well, AI is does not feeds of data, right? The basic feedstock is data, and if we don't have the data in the quality and completeness where we need them to answer the questions that we want it to answer, we won't get very far. And I think this was a big part of the learning curve that companies have been going to with following their in the first footsteps in their AI journey. And but a lot of the cases that they were looking at is that they're seeing that there are so many synergies between following this sustainability transformation as well as the digital transformation, which of course AI is very much at the forefront of now today. So everyone sees the potential. It really depends a little bit on in which fields and areas in the value chain companies see the biggest potentials for optimization. Also depends of the setup where they sit in the value creation process. But the overall definitely feedback that we got is everyone is very focused and optimistic, and we did not get any like hesitation back that we don't see it. It's more a question of, okay, what do we need to put in place to actually leverage the full potential of AI for our business?
Yeah. And
And is
maybe I
that
can add
something that you do as well, Francis?
Sorry, Katharine. No, I was going to add one word on that, in the sense that the way we look at it, what Pina was highlighting, which really resonate with the projects we've been leading ourselves, is that then you make the connection between that specific investment, in this case on AI, with actually the full reinvention of how companies and organizations operate. Because for us, that's the thread which is important now for companies which manage to get to a new level of performance. And what does that mean? That means that, of course, they've got to get the technology spent in the right way, and we call that the digital core, in the sense that when companies focus on developing AI investment and scale them, they can only do that if they've got some maturity of their IT system in the cloud, right? If their IT system is not already largely in the cloud, you cannot scale AI. If the data themselves, the data structure of a company, whether you speak about structured data, unstructured data, and synthetic data right now, if the data policy and structure and investment is not in place, you cannot scale AI. So there are lots of these conditions which are part of what we call the digital core, and for us that's the first condition of success. But there are elements beyond technology, and the one I would like to mention is about talent, because what we see is that lots of companies right now, when they think about AI investment, they invest 3 times more in the technology than they invest in the people, in people chain, in upskilling, in training. And actually what we have seen from previous waves of technology transformation is that actually, to make it happen at scale, generally you have got to flip these percentages and spend 3 times more on people change than on technology change. And we can see that in lots of companies, it's not happening yet. So that's the second element. The third element, which resonates with what we've seen and we've discussed so far today, is what we call responsible AI, is that you have to get the governance in place to make sure that you put your AI in the governance in the long run. And that's what we call the responsible AI. The fourth element is to get the top leaders involved in that change. We've seen that in many of these technology transformation. It's not been critical every time to have CEOs and boards involved directly in these changes. For this specific change with generative AI, because it's transforming all the work of knowledge workers, that means that CEOs, CXOs, boards can experience that themselves. And so we see that as actually a very important point to have the CEOs involved directly. And the fifth element that we've seen is that we speak here about continuous reinvention. It's not a one-off. I mean, we've heard already today that there are lots of elements of technology which are changing. The computing architecture of lots of companies is going to continue to change. So it's important for companies not to look at that as a one-off, but it's actually an important step, but in the reinvention journey that will accompany for the years coming.
Thank you, Francis. I just wanted to pick up on, Pina, you were speaking earlier about partnerships, and Francis, you spoke there about governance and responsible AI. I'm wondering about the role of government in this as well. So in the UK, the government has just set up an AI Energy Council, and we know in the US, the government is looking at potential new data center sites. How important is it that governments are involved in bringing these things together and making sure that it works efficiently and, as you say, Francis, responsibly? Let's start with you, Graeme.
So at the outset, I said obviously energy infrastructure is long-term investment, right? It's risk-averse long-term. So what you actually get by having government intervention is an element of certainty. What you need in an energy space, because it cycles many political cycles, is you need that sort of policy and investment certainty. The cold reality is most of our big infrastructure, big generation, big grids is actually your pension money, right? So this is patient capital, low risk, sort of low return. I guess there's a point at which you don't want government intervention, because arguably sometimes governments tend to sort of stifle innovation. They tend to be not at the cutting edge. So I think there's a fine line between what you get as a benefit from having government intervention and not having overreach where it starts to stifle innovation. I mean, let's just pinpoint specifically on energy. The energy system is as important as clean water, fresh air. It's life critical. So what we've tended to have is very risk averse, gated systems, islanded systems. And so there's almost been a reluctance to allow too much tech and therefore security risk or less of hands-on in the energy system. But the cold reality is the energy system, to survive the energy transition we're in, needs to adopt all of this. So another interesting sort of government intervention is, where does government intervention and policy direction bleed through into regulatory control? Because regulators love to say, don't spend anything today that you can't defer to tomorrow. Don't put costs on consumers today that you can defer till tomorrow. That tends to kick the can down the road. So I think there's also that interplay between governmental policy intervention and how that bleeds through into regulation to allow things like the energy system to evolve at the pace that it's going to need to be able to accommodate the changes that are coming.
Pina and Francis, I'd love to get your take on this as well.
Yeah, maybe I can go first. So I think, looking at this from an industry perspective, it's of course I think what we're saying, like, how does it trickle down into stifling innovation, is definitely a part that resonates for me. And as well, it's like, okay, how can we provide that mid to long term consistency of where we are heading, right? I think especially in the EU or globally, where we're seeing this back and forth, is, are we now going in the Green Deal all in, or are we rolling back half of it? Or it's like, right? Even in industrial sales, when we like go one direction, we like to make sure it's okay. This is something that's not built in a day, right? Or these ships that we operate in are not steered in one direction or the other in a day. So I think those that really resonate. But it also, if I flip that around, what we see is, and how we are transforming ourselves is, of course, our surroundings are getting more dynamic and more complex, necessitating us to become much more adaptable and flexible, to go not only to basically like react wherever the market forces are going, but actually to be flexible and adaptable enough to be in our own driver's seat of where we want to be going, right? At the speed that we want to be going in that direction. So I think that's, looking at from in the industry perspective, definitely I think I see in dimension part of that transition that we are in, is getting it into the core of the industrial fabric, that we are need to be not only within our own uh, company borders, but much more, as we've been saying earlier, in the ecosystem. And I see that especially through the lens of sustainability, because it touches every aspect of the value chain, right? We need to have that interplay much closer and much more uh, yeah flexible again, with all the players in our value chain. So my 2 cents on that.
And Francis, did you want to build on that at all?
Well, just maybe one word is that, and just building on what Pina was saying immediately before on ecosystem and value chain. That's the way we look at it as well. And what is critical and what is fairly new in the way that people look at AI is that it's not easy to understand. There are lots of complexities which are not easy to understand for all of us. And we've seen mention of AI sometimes being hard to explain, sometimes being a black box, and so on and so forth. And so for us, the ability to explain what is happening, the ability to explain what we do, to exchange with other players of the ecosystem is actually paramount, because it helps to build trust. And out of trust, you're going to have more investment, you're going to have more consumption, and you're going to have a virtuous circle in the ecosystem. So whatever we can do to help to build that trust in the ecosystem, we're always happy to do it.
I just wanted to come back to what I began the session with, talking about, the way the business leaders are investing or beginning to invest in AI for the productivity and efficiency benefits of that, but also with one eye on their sustainability commitments. How can those leaders manage both? How can they ensure that they are benefiting from AI, but also bringing a positive or ensuring a positive societal impact? Graeme, if I could begin with you there.
Yeah. I would come back to my point, whole systems thinking.
Mhm.
If you're gonna think about your demand for energy growth, your demand for data, you can't just say, well, that's for someone else to worry about. You can't outsource your obligation. So I think, starting with your scope 1, scope 2, and then scope 3 emissions, that's really important. Reporting emissions is important, but don't make knee-jerk reactions. Ask the consequential questions. Think whole system, because it's only by collaborating, convening, having the debate. We don't know what we don't know. It's only by bringing thought leaders together, by bringing drivers of the process together, do you actually get better whole system outcomes, right? So, and I think for me that it's core. That collaboration is key, and work with good people to help you work through the consequence and the risk of unintended consequences.
Mhm. And Francis, what are your thoughts on this? You're obviously advising clients daily on these issues.
Yeah, well, I like the point that Graeme was mentioning on scope 3. That's actually a point on which we've been working ourselves. I mean, we are publishing every year a report on what we call Destination Net Zero, where we actually measure year after year how companies behave, the progress they're making or not making in different industries and regions on scope 1, on scope 2, on scope 3. And what we have seen is that just by publishing this annual report, we can see that it helps companies to compare to each other, and by comparing themselves to other companies of different industry, different regions, it helps them on the path forward. And so that's why we are happy to share this type of research that we do with the companies, in the sense that it helps them to take their own decision related to the future. And we can see that there is progress on that year after year. Of course, some of it depend on companies on what we call the demand side, so making the investment in technology, and some of it depend on companies more on the supply side, the technology companies themselves. And we spoke a little bit about it earlier, the investment that they're making themselves in having more efficient systems as well for the future.
Of course, obviously, it's not AI. There will be other technologies now and in future that will be energy intensive. Do you feel that companies now having to look at this are, starting to gain perspective and perhaps the kind of resilience they need to prepare for the impact of some of those future technologies as well?
Mhm. Well, resilience is a good word, right? I like it, and we've been publishing on resilience because through the different waves of changes that companies have been facing in recent years, has been for us a key way of companies to thrive. And we can see that the companies which are more resilient actually thrive more during these cycles, and there are more coming. I mean, the people in the technology area speak a lot about quantum, right, for the future and what that means. And we can see already quantum in some areas having an impact on businesses, and probably more to come. So it's a continuous reinvention that I was mentioning earlier on. And we think that by investing in these areas, having the right watch on what is happening in different regions, in different industries, that helps companies to progress, especially in these days where boundaries between industries are blurring. And so it's we look at it as extremely important to know more for each company what is happening in technology, because we've seen and we've said a few years ago that every company was becoming a technology company, and we actually stand by that statement. We think that every year we see a bit more of it.
I mean, Pina, you are also a technology company. How do you, but being in sustainability as well yourself, how do you advise your clients to balance the two to make sure they are still having a positive, wider impact as well as that business impact?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I mean, for me, a lot of the work that I do is very much informed by the sustainability transformation and the journey we have been on, actually for the last 15 years. So that's when we took like the first committed steps on that, and that really informed how we have been approaching that through our own technologies. And what we learned very early on is that, of course, we talked about that at the very beginning, I believe. It's like, okay, of course, definitely, I'm with you absolutely here, Francis and Graeme. We need to have this transparency, this baseline. Where do we stand in our scope 1, 2, 3, to have that holistic understanding? Where do our footprints in our value chain come from, and where do we need to attack to optimize efficiently, right? And now, taking that into consideration, when we then optimize, how do we do that at scale and in a time scales at a speed that is fast enough uh, to actually transform large industrial corporates like Siemens, right? So, and I mean, if we're talking about industrial timescale 2030, 2050, it's really just a big blink of an eye. It's so that the crucial point from the beginning was, how do we transform ourselves at scale, so to every entity of our own value chain, of our own business, right? And in that time scale. So this is where we said, okay, well, we don't have even the people power in the just in the sheer numbers that we would need with sustainability expertise to put into every team where we would theoretically need it, right, to scale that along our entire business. So we said, okay, how can we like kill two birds with one stone here? We're of course in our digital transformation, and it's not one thing that has an end, right? It's constantly transforming. Can we piggyback and use the synergies to that endeavor to also bring the sustainability expertise basically into the teams we already have today, who have deep expertise in our products, in the processes of our manufacturing, in our supply chain, to basically empower them to take data-driven decisions for sustainability without having to have a PhD in sustainability science, right? So, and this is where we basically took the approach of integrating that sustainability expertise into the software systems that our teams are already working with today, and integrating it as well into the processes, right, of how products are developed, of how production processes are run, right? So this was an approach that I believe has very much put us into the position of actually outpacing our own commitments and target dates that we had set ourselves for our own transformation, because we leveraged the flywheel of the digital transformation for our sustainability transformation, and still are, to be honest, right? By democratizing sustainability expertise, and as well having the decisions that we take being data driven. And I think everyone who's in the sustainability space knows this. It's a space where people get very enthusiastic, but also um, sometimes emotional about the decisions that are being taken. But of course, in a business setting, an industrial setting, we want to have base our decision making on data, on facts, right? Not merely on, well, I believe this. Of course, we embrace these enthusiasm, but we want to ground it in data, right? So basically, that was the big synergies that we are leveraging here, that has really been enabled us to have this speed as well as the scale grounded in data. Um, and that's the same approach that we are following with our customers as well, with the industrial partners that we're working with. And this actually taps back into the ecosystem that we're operating in, because of course, a lot of our products are only possible through the collaboration with our suppliers, but also with our solution technology partners, with scientific institutes that we work with, and with our customers. It's often today a much more co-development creation process, and without the open data ecosystems that we have today and the sharing of the relevant data in the data quality, and also in machine readable format. It's sometimes very the nitty-gritty details that are these enabling capabilities that we need to actually get that transformation onto the street and actually understand how the interrelation is between following the sustainability imperative, but also how does it relate to our profitability, time to market, while we want to tap into new products, new business lines, new business models, as we've been also talking about earlier, right? So it's understanding all these interrelations that allows us to master that complexity, but also shape where we want to go and tap into that potential.
And I think it's really interesting that Pina, you and Francis both mentioned that human expertise and the people power. I think one of you said as well. Is that something also that is part of the package that needs to be considered? Francis, perhaps you can speak to this, that companies should actually be looking at really investing in those skills as much as the technology and the other energy-driven considerations here.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm going to start from a point which was not the most comfortable for us initially. As you mentioned initially, I lead the research team at Accenture, and one of the research we've been doing that we call our human moment is talking to consumers, talking to people, following them. So what we call ethnography research in our world. To look at how they behave in terms of sustainability. And when I say it was not extremely comfortable for us initially, is because we came with framework, we came with a language that we realized was not necessarily the language which was understood, accepted, and used by the consumers that we were following every day. And one element we took away from that is that to make sure that all these changes related to sustainability are owned by consumers in the countries in which we operate, it is absolutely fundamental that we speak in their terms and we address what they care about their family, about the people they love, about their communities, and that we start from these needs to actually show that what we're going to do with our clients is going to be a direct answer to these needs and their expectation, rather than having a top-down approach that we used to have predominantly. And shifting the lens for us has been a key success factor in the way we've been implementing some of these sustainability priorities with some of our clients.
That's great. That's a really nice way to wrap up, Francis, because I'm afraid we have reached the end of our time here today. It's been a fascinating discussion. I hope everyone watching has enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much for joining us, and especially thank you to my guests, Francis Hintermann, Graeme Cooper, and Pina Schlombs. Tomorrow we will be sending a recording of the webinar to everyone who registered, and we'll also share contact details if you do have any additional questions. So thank you once again. And we look forward to having you join us for a future webinar as well. Bye-bye.